Jim. He's dead.
Hello, this is Improv Autopsy, and I'm your host, Stephen Cadwell. In this interview, I talk with Will Meinen. Will's improv journey has taken him from Omaha to Chicago and back again. Will currently teaches improv at Backline Comedy Theater in Omaha and is the education director for the Omaha Comedy Festival, as well as sundry other creative endeavors in Omaha and beyond. Will and I first met when we were in an improvised psychological thriller together in Chicago. Will was on an I.O. House team. He coached Carl and the Passions for a time, was a member of the Under the Gun Ensemble, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. Will is incredibly smart and incredibly talented. Some intellectuals are victims of their own hubris and wear their knowledge like an albatross on stage. Will is not one of those. He glides on his rich intellect and lifts his scene partners in the process, making for a performance that is engaging and entertaining on multiple levels. One of his idols is Gene Wilder, and Will exudes some of the same energy that defined Gene. If you couldn't already tell, I'm a fan. Welcome to Will Meinen's Improv Autopsy.
So I know you from Chicago. We met in Chicago, but I didn't know you
Yes.
before then. What was your first encounter with improv? How did you get connected?
So I had never seen improv in my entire life. I didn't know it existed as an art form until I was probably 30.
Really? You hadn't been exposed to Who's Line even?
Well, I mean, I guess so, but I don't know if I even conceptualized it as improv. You know what I mean?
Sure.
That sounds strange to say, but I didn't, when I watched Who's Line, I didn't really know what I was watching. And I grew up, I was born in 1978, I grew up watching the British version.
Yes.
That was on Comedy Central. And I don't know if, I don't know, I didn't name it improv. They didn't call it improv. I didn't know what the difference would be between short form and long form.
Yeah.
So I guess more accurately, the first time I saw long form was, I was 30, and I was in Chicago for a conference for work. I was still in Omaha. And I had loved all things sketch comedy growing up, and I decided to sign up for a weekend intensive at Second City. And so I did a weekend intensive and saw a main stage show, and then saw a ton of shows at Annoyance and I.O. And that's really when I first saw long form improv and conceptualized, oh, this is long form improv, and then someone drew the distinction between short form and long form for me, probably at the Second City intensive.
Okay.
So that was my first real introduction to it. And then I tried to find it where I was living at the time, which was Omaha.
And was there anything at the time in Omaha?
Very little. 2 groups were doing improv, and it was primarily, well, no, that's not true. One group was doing a mix of short form and long form. The other group was doing exclusively short form. And I approached one of the groups that was doing a little bit more long form after I'd done one intensive. And this was just an insane, I don't know why I thought this was even like an appropriate thing to ask. But I was just like, hey, I would go to their shows. And after one of the shows, I was like, hey, do you want to add another person? Have you thought about adding another person? Or can I rehearse with you? I don't know why I was asking this. And they were very sweet and polite, and they were like, no, we're good.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, I respected it entirely. I mean, after I had asked, and like on the ride home, and I was like, that was kind of weird. But I was just so hungry to do anything.
Yeah.
That I was willing to put myself out there in that way.
Was that hunger triggered just from that was just from the experience at Second City and having seen a lot when you were in Chicago?
Totally. Just that one experience. I within the first hour of the weekend intensive at Second City, I was like, oh, this is going to take over my life. You know? I was just like, yeah, this is what I'm doing now. And that's without any theatrical experience prior to that either. Like, I hadn't spent really any time on stage.
So that's when it clicked generally. Can you pinpoint a moment within that where everything really clicked, or not really because it was just part of the grand experience?
Yeah, I think it was it might have been a little bit later in the process. I think it was probably when I got to do my first scene, even if it had a ton of parameters around it, right? And I'm sure it did.
Yeah.
I'm sure it was like, here's your location, here's your relationship. This is generally what's going on. But yeah, that was probably that first scene that I did. I was so scared. I was equal parts thrilled and frightened in a way that I hadn't had the experience that was that visceral doing anything else.
And it
And
got
I
you
think I
hooked.
was more thrilled than I was afraid,
Yeah.
and therefore willing to keep doing it. And then from that point I was hooked, and I knew I wanted to do it. For some reason, it's just like I want to do this really well. I want to figure out how you do this well.
Yeah. I wish this is going to sound worse than I mean it, but I wish everyone had
Yeah.
that mindset.
No, I totally get it.
You said the first show you saw that made sense as improv or was billed as improv was at the conference. Do you remember who they were that did the show or?
No, it wasn't at the conference. It was I
Oh,
was in town for a conference. I stuck
oh,
around
gotcha.
for the weekend, so I was there for a work conference, but just did a tag along from my work conference into my weekend. You know, I
Yeah.
used the flight out as a justification to stay. So no, the first thing I saw was a Second City main stage show.
Okay.
Which had improv at the end, right?
Uh-huh.
They did their main stage show and then came out and did 25 minutes of improv at the end. So that's the first time I saw improv. And it's actually the first time I saw live sketch. I'd grown up watching sketch comedy, but that's the first time I saw live sketch as well.
Now, do you remember the name of the review?
Between Barack and a Hard Place.
Okay.
Amber Ruffin was in that cast, and she's from Omaha.
Oh.
And I ended up performing with her in town like a year or two later, maybe, because I eventually found somebody from Nebraska who had been in LA and had done UCB, moved back to Omaha, and wanted to start teaching classes. And I took, his name's Dylan Rohde, he now owns Comedy Theater here in Omaha. And I took classes from him, and Amber was in town, and she came and did a show at the space that we were using. And I got to perform with Amber like a year after I saw her on main stage, probably.
Nice.
Yeah.
How long were you in Chicago?
7 years.
Okay.
Between seeing that first show in Chicago and moving to Chicago was probably 3 years.
Okay.
So it took me a little bit of time. I had to sell a house and like unwind some things. You know, I was a
Yeah.
little bit older. So I had an established life and career. And I had to figure out like, how am I going to blow my life up, right? How am I going to do this like impractical thing?
Yeah.
And I didn't want to show up, in retrospect, I shouldn't have been this hard on myself, but this is just how I am. I didn't want to show up like completely unprepared, if that makes any sense. As somebody who had no stage experience, I at least wanted to get to a place where I was comfortable on stage, even if I wasn't a good improviser. And I kind of waited until I got to that place and then moved to Chicago. And I moved to Chicago in 2012.
How did you get to that place?
Just reps.
There in Omaha?
Yeah, I had that once. I went through classes, and I didn't even like go through a full year of classes before we started doing shows. Like we were doing shows after I'd finished like level 2 of classes, way too early. And I was doing, because there wasn't that much of a community, I was like in every show, you know. So I would like do a set, the next group would get introduced, and I would run off stage and then run back on stage. So for me it was just absolutely about reps. And what I could feel happening, I always described it as like early on I felt like I had a vice on my brain when I was on stage.
Yeah.
That I just didn't feel like I had access to my full intelligence because fear of being judged, the fear of saying something stupid, the fear of getting lost in the scene, any of those things. The fishbowl aspect of having I wouldn't say a group of people, 3 people maybe, watching you. These were very small audiences. Just kind of locked up my brain a bit. And over time I could feel the vice loosening, and I just had more and more access to my full intellectual capacity while being on stage, while remaining in character, and doing all the mechanics of improv.
I would be very interested in watching one of those early shows because you are one of the smartest players I've played with. So to remove some of your intellect, I would think that would be an interesting thing to see because you are a very intelligent player and very intelligent in general, and you bring all that to the stage, which is awesome.
Well, thank you. I imagine it was, who knows what the hell it looked like. I'm glad that There's not evidence of early shows. I don't know if I could handle it. Have you watched yourself, like, early on in the learning process?
I think there's some stuff out there from me when I was in Florida, just sort of getting into the theater down there. But I've never really enjoyed watching myself, so there's a lot of it I haven't watched.
Right. Although I think it is a good, enlightening experience, right?
Yes.
Like I don't think anybody enjoys watching themselves.
I think for the sake of this podcast, too, maybe I should go and watch some of that and kind of examine it a little bit, because the impetus for this was I was in a weird headspace when I was in Chicago for a good portion of that time.
Right.
And I know there's an audition at Annoyance that I can remember like it was yesterday. And I think about it, and right now there are 100 ways I could have done that differently. But at the time, I felt like I had been torpedoed by the person that I was up there with. And it just deflated me in the moment.
Yeah.
And ruined the audition for me. But all of that, at the moment, I would have said that they were at fault. But in retrospect now, I'm like, no, I could have and should have been able to navigate through that. And now I definitely could. But, it's those kinds of things that you never enjoy living in those moments longer than you need to.
No, absolutely. Why do you say you were in a weird headspace while you were in Chicago?
Oh, there's just a lot going on when I was up there, having to find enough employment to financially support both living and paying for IO
Classes.
And everything else. Yeah. And then I got married when in Chicago, so that was on my mind. And
it's also like it's an incredible place, right?
I love Chicago
so much. I loved it so much. My experience was amazing. But it does feel like a bit of a pressure cooker, right? I mean, you've got talented people from all over the country and the world.
Yeah.
And it's very supportive, but that's not to say that it's not also very competitive.
Yeah.
Because it absolutely is.
Yes.
And it feels high stakes, right?
Yeah.
Not when you're doing like a house show, like in somebody's walk-up or at Underground Lounge or in the back of a bar. But when you're auditioning, when you're competing for spots at Second City, Annoyance, or IO, it does feel like there's a bit of pressure.
Yes. And there's also an interesting, everyone's there for different reasons, I feel, too. And that was the biggest sort of culture shock for me coming from Florida, because in
Right.
Orlando, no one comes to Orlando to pull people to TV shows.
Right.
There are some TV shows that might cast in Orlando and people get work down there, but otherwise you have a steady job at a theme park that's paying the bills, and then you have all these other side things that you do because you love to do them, and there's not really that pressure of I need this to be the stepping stone to get me to the next thing.
Right.
So yeah, it plays with your head a little bit.
For sure.
You moved to Chicago. I know you said it was too soon, you started too soon, but those reps were invaluable, don't you feel?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think people probably delay getting on stage too long.
Yeah.
Waiting for some magical time in which they feel prepared or they think it's going to be good. And yeah, I'm so fortunate to have gotten as much time on stage when I was not yet a very good improviser as I did. Super helpful. One of the most challenging things about comedy, I think, compared to any other art form, is that you can't wait until you're good to get on stage.
Yeah.
Right? There's no practicing in your bedroom that can happen. Comedy is something that is forged in the crucible of an audience, right?
Yeah.
Even if that's other improvisers just waiting to do their set, right? Or just having finished their set. You still have to do it in front of an audience, and that means that comedians in particular are learning their art form with an audience, which is a wild thing to do. It's very vulnerable, feels very naked.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was super helpful.
My first improv instructor when I was in college, Lyda Stillwell is her name, but she said one of the first days, it was a class, and she said, doing improv is like being naked on stage. And she's right.
Yeah, no doubt.
You're exposed.
Mm-hmm.
So do you remember the first show that you did in any way, or is it just a...
The first run of shows I did was at the Conservatory. Do you remember that place?
No.
It was on Lincoln Avenue in Oh, I guess that might be North Center, or maybe that's Roscoe Village. It had a ear of corn on the front of it. It had a super weird stage that had like multiple levels to it, and was not like a rectangle.
Okay.
And the Corn Conservatory had a competition show. Loads of people did it as like one of their first runs. And I was in this group called Lost Dog with my friends Patrick DeNicola and Josh Robinson. Those were the first shows I got to do in Chicago.
Okay.
So it was a competition show, so it had short form components, a judging panel, and then you could do at the end of like the short formy bits, you did 7 minutes maybe, tops 10, which it's always wild to me. Like 10 to 15 minutes feels like a lot of time when you're starting out. Like we're gonna fill 15 minutes. This is forever.
Yeah.
Now it feels like not enough time to even leave the house.
Right.
But those were that was the first run of shows that I did.
And you felt good about them?
I felt amazing. Those two guys were some of my favorite people to perform with. And we played at a super high pace, really high energy. I don't know if the scenes always made sense. There might have been a lot of lifting and jumping off of things. I don't know. It was meant to be like a visceral experience.
Yeah.
So, it was an opportunity to just go nuts. So they felt amazing. They always felt really good. We kind of had it. We rehearsed together a lot as well, and trusted each other entirely. So it was the best case scenario for those early shows. Because what can happen is that you can and should take any opportunity you get, right?
Yeah.
Anybody who asks you to play with them, play with them.
Right.
Right. Join groups that don't feel good. Who cares? Like none of this.
Yeah, get the reps where you can.
Yeah, absolutely. So I also played in the context of ensembles that didn't feel great, right? And probably learned more from those than the ones that did feel good.
Yeah.
But that was a group that I continued to perform with that was a stabilizing force. And then I go out and play with all kinds of other independent groups or jams or, drop-ins. It's like being an amateur golfer, like improvising early on, where you get hooked because you hit a really good drive.
Yeah.
But everything throughout the rest of that round is going to be a hot mess, So I kept showing up, but the first, probably I would say 5 years, I felt like I was really inconsistent, or the shows I was doing were really inconsistent.
When you look at the groups that you were in that you say didn't feel good, is there a dynamic, or what about them didn't feel good versus the groups that did feel good?
I mean, some of it can be interpersonal, I think. A bigger piece for me is style and approach to the art form. But how do you think about it? What do you think good improv looks like?
Yeah.
I think you can play with folks that have a completely different approach, and sometimes there's an alchemy to that probably leads to the best teams. Like the house teams at I.O. that were great Herald teams were made up of some magical elixir of styles, individual styles.
Yeah.
But that only works, I think, 5% of the time, where you jam a bunch of different styles of players together and you end up with something brilliant. Often what you end up with is something pretty convoluted.
Yeah.
So I think the times where I felt the most successful early on, and probably still now, are when I'm playing with people that have a similar approach.
Okay. The group with Patrick and Josh was Lost Dog, you said.
Yes.
Do you have are there any other names of groups, you don't have to tell me whether they felt good or not, but that you were a part of, not necessarily just one time, that were interesting or stupid? I love stupid improv group names.
I think they're all dumb. It's like complete. Although when I first moved to the city, I was like, man, teams like Revolver's a great name. Like one word titles.
Yeah.
For improv groups always feel good to me. The Reckoning, that's a hell of a name.
Yeah.
Family Treehouse Boat Accident is a good name. I was on the 2 Herald teams, The Incident, which we spent way too much time naming.
It's not a bad name, though.
It's a good name. I think it was the one I advocated for the strongest. It might have been my contribution to the name list Man, we spent so much time trying to name that group. And then Big Spoon was my other Herald team at IO.
And they were named before you were on, right?
Yes, yeah. And they were great. Big Spoon was awesome. That's a group of people with very different styles that actually, I think, worked really well.
Yeah, I don't know what the alchemy is either, but you may have encountered this as well. But one of the things that David Rosowski says is the only mistake you can make in improv is casting.
Right. Right. Well, I think what you need to have a balance of more annoyance style players or folks that are going to walk onto stage, make big choices, big character choices in particular, I think, and have more of the I take care of you by taking care of me approach.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to balance those people that are more engaged with the show moves or taking care of the piece or are able to hold the piece in their head the entire time.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to heralds. There are certain people that you'll play with that are like, I don't think about the piece at all, right?
Yeah.
That aren't noticing like that there's some thematic elements that are bubbling up that are not thinking about callbacks, should certainly make them, but don't have that sense that like, oh, this thing that's happening in the first beat is a device that we're going to now use throughout this piece, which might be a certain edit, or it might be, but like we're starting to break the fourth wall, we need to break the fourth wall harder and more, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Or this thing that we're doing in the opening, like I would have moments where we would be doing an organic opening and I would think, oh, this is where this show is going to end. Right? Like we're going to return to this thing. The genie came out of the bottle in the organic opening. We're going to put it back in the bottle at the end, or try to, right? And I think you need some of those people that are having those thoughts.
Yeah.
And then you need some other people that are just making totally visceral, in the moment choices. And rarely do you get all of that in one person.
Right.
And that's what casting is for.
When you would have those thoughts, how often did that come about, that the thing that you saw in the opening was the thing that you came back around to? Were you able to get that to happen, or did it sometimes not happen more often than not? Or
totally. I mean, probably early on I would make it happen inorganically, right? Which I don't recommend. But I think it was a matter of learning that muscle of holding that a little bit more loosely in your palm.
yeah.
Right? Like, ooh, I think that's an opportunity, and I'm just going to put a pin in that. And if it happens such that I'm reminded of that thing again at the end of this piece, then I'll initiate that happening.
Yeah.
I used to cram things in more often when I first started,
Yeah.
for sure.
I think that's common, and I think, but it's it's also a way to learn that stuff. So, Improvised Theater Company, you and I did a show with that group.
Yes.
I don't know, you may have done more than, because I only did the one, and then I remember we started to kind of workshop doing an absurdist, I think it was Absurd.
Yeah.
Those are some really fun workshops, I felt. We never actually got to any product, but we did the improvised psychological thriller.
Yeah.
It wasn't supposed to be funny, I don't think, or that wasn't the goal, but
Right.
Did you do any other improv that was not comedic or not intended to be comedic?
No, because I don't think it works.
Well, that's why I was saying I don't think it was intended, because I feel like the shows that we did ended up being funny.
Yeah, but not in an intentional way.
Yeah.
And I'd rather intentionally be funny, right?
Yeah. Yep.
I'd much rather that be a stated objective than something be unintentionally funny. And by that, I don't mean, because definitely some of the funniest things that come out of my mouth are not things that they're a surprise to me.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
And they're funny because of the context that's been built, or the world that's been built, or that the character is saying something that's funny because you've built brick by brick this person that now is saying something that makes the audience laugh because they're thinking, oh, that's so that person, right? In the way that your best friends make you laugh sometimes because they say something that's not inherently and objectively funny, but because it could only come from their brain.
Yes.
So that's the kind of unintentionally funny that is the best kind of funny.
Yeah.
The least desirable kind of funny are the kinds of things that happen when you watch really bad improv shows that are so bad they're funny, right?
Yeah.
Or if you're watching a movie that is intended to be dramatic or thrilling and has executed it so poorly that you can't help but laugh. Which is not something you want to be part of, right? So no, I never did anything else that was unintentionally unfunny or dramatic. Because drama, I don't think can be improvised. I do think improv should or is best served when there are moments that feel emotionally authentic and
Right.
grounded. However,
Yeah.
and so when I was referring earlier to styles and approaches, one of the things that makes it hardest to play with someone is if they don't believe improv should have moments that feel authentic and real, like two human beings having a conversation
Yeah.
about maybe something that's hard, which then blows up the balloon so you can pop it
Yes.
with something funny. And so that's one of my core principles as an improviser is like, if somebody says something to me that feels vulnerable or authentic, I'm not going to reply to it with something that's gamey or purposely funny or humorous.
Yeah.
Right? I'm just going to reply to that thing as I would as a person.
Yeah. If you're flippant or dismissive, then
Yeah.
the audience just hates you.
They do. Absolutely. Yeah. So I don't think the art form is a good container for like dramatic improv, and I don't think that designation is necessary. I think if you're doing it the way I prefer to do it, the style I prefer to play in, is one in which there's probably going to be a dramatic moment, like a signature dramatic moment within the show.
Yeah. I think a lot of people are always chasing the laugh, but there are other reactions from the audience that I find just as valuable or just as enriching for me. Like if you can get an entire audience to gasp, or there's a moment
Yeah.
where you can hear a pin drop because you've got them in the
Totally.
palm of your hand, those are amazing moments and shouldn't be poo-pooed because they aren't laughs. The laughter's great, but so are the other moments.
Which is why I think an obsessive focus on game is one that I think leads to fewer of those moments that you're describing.
Yeah.
And I struggle with that approach for that reason.
Yeah. I would agree.
That it doesn't allow for those experiences to happen as organically or as frequently. I can't remember who it was that I read said that, you know, at the end of a really good improv show, you want people applauding because something happened in the room that felt unique to the moment, surprising to the audience and the people on stage, that you made connections,
Yeah.
right, that feel like remarkable to have made and only happened because the ensemble had a collective memory of the show and was engaged with like really purposeful and deep group work.
Yeah.
And that's not exclusively about whether or not people were laughing the entire time.
Definitely.
And often some of the gamiest shows or funniest shows I've been a part of, I don't remember.
Yeah. Yes.
And they don't even linger in my mind like on the train ride home. They feel like empty calories to me.
Yeah.
Like, it feels like sitting down and eating a pint of ice cream.
Have you read Steve Martin's autobiography, Born Standing Up?
Yeah.
He says something in there, and this is that really resonated with me, and I think it's speaking to this. And he said, and this will be a paraphrase because I don't remember exactly, but it wasn't good enough for him. He didn't want to be just funny in the moment. He wanted to be funny in the car ride home.
Yeah.
And that to me is what we're talking about. It's like if you can pick that low-hanging fruit and you can get the laugh right then, or people can be thinking about it on the ride home and the next day and laughing again because of the product that they saw.
Totally. Yeah. You want somebody trying to explain a show to their coworker.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
failing miserably, right?
Yeah. Are you sure this wasn't a dream? No, it was a show.
Yeah, right. No, the show is...
What would you say, if there is anything, what's the most shocking thing you've seen or done on stage? Good or bad?
I did a show with The Incident, my first Herald team, which is made up of some, like, total nuts. There was a sketch group called Three Bunnies Eating Flowers, and they were brilliant and very funny, and the most extreme I've ever seen people on stage. Loads of nudity, mostly male. And two of the people from that sketch group were on my first Herald team, and they just had an inclination towards chaos.
Yeah.
And it would sometimes create some of the most enjoyable, insane things I've ever seen, and sometimes just like blow a giant hole in the middle of your show, and you know, it would just bleed out on stage. But I was doing a scene. I initiated a very boring scene idea. We were on a boat fishing. I don't even like to fish. I don't know why I initiated. I think I was just bereft of ideas and still learning very much and making choices that didn't feel necessarily interesting to me. Sometimes I find myself making a choice like, this isn't interesting to me. Why am I making this choice? But I had made that choice, and I'm doing this scene with my scene partner. And Jude goes out into the house, and he grabs a pint glass of water off of somebody's table, and he throws it in the face of my scene partner. Full glass of water.
Yeah.
As though a wave had popped up, and then people on stage just started going out into the house and picking up water, and starting scenes by dumping water on their heads. And there was this... So the stage is getting progressively wetter.
Yeah.
And at one point, we're probably in a group game. I can't remember where we're at in the show. And I noticed that Jude is gone. He's not on stage. And he returns. He went to the bar, and he got a ice bucket, and he filled it with water. And he came back in, and two people were on stage in chairs, and he walked up on stage and he just poured the bucket of water on those two people. And then people started running and sliding across the stage. Patrick DeNicolo, who I mentioned earlier, he was on that team. He went and he dove across the stage, and another friend of mine, Mike Garrity, who's on my team, Big Spoon, who's a massive human being, ran behind him to slide on top of Patrick. I don't know what his choice was, but Patrick almost bit a hole through his lip and was bleeding. The stage was covered in water. Patrick was bleeding. Yeah, it was absolutely bonkers. That's probably the most insane improv show I've been a part of. That then descended into full-on madness.
And was it well received?
It was memorable. I think there was a lot of shock. I think we got a lot of laughs that are the kind of laughs that are like, what is this? What is actually happening? I mean, you have to remember, of course, that at the I.O., you would often have a lot of improvisers in the house, but people did pay tickets.
Yeah.
They'd pay for tickets, and were just general public who perhaps and likely had never seen a show before.
Yeah.
So I feel bad if this was people's first introduction to improv, this is what this is. But it was definitely some form of a gonzo theater experience. Yeah, that was the nuttiest show I've...
Kathy, why do you have so many glasses of water in your cubicle? I'm practicing improv.
Right, totally.
I'm imagining this taking place downstairs in Wrigleyville.
No, this was new building. This was new building upstairs.
Okay.
I think in the Chin Cabaret. Yeah, I mean, beautiful theater, nice space. Early on, and we did our best to try to wreck it.
Any emails received from anyone saying...
No, surprising. No Herald Commission, no Charna giving us a business. No, we had to clean it up, for sure. I think the people that were probably the least happy with us were the bar staff.
You were closing that show, then, I take it.
No, we were not. We were opening, which is what makes it that's probably the boldest part of it, right? Yeah. Is to be making those choices as the opener.
Yeah. Hey guys, we're gonna take 10 minutes of your set to clean the stage for
totally.
you so you don't die.
We did. Absolutely. Yeah.
Do you remember who you were opening for?
I do not. No, a more established Herald team that I think was rather amused, or I'd like to think so.
Yeah. I was.
But yeah, we did. No, we finished the set and then said like, give us 10 minutes. Give us 10 minutes.
Now, what was your participation in? Did you just get water poured on you? Did you join in the?
I got water poured on me. I did not slide across stage.
Yeah.
I think I was probably a little bit less comfortable with the level of chaos.
Yeah.
You know, one of my challenges when I was in Chicago, I don't know if I was ever able to really move past this in a way that would have opened me up a little bit more. But like I mentioned earlier, I started improv later in life for most people, right? And when I got to Chicago, I was 34. By this time, I'm like 36.
Yeah.
And I always felt a little bit, I always felt just older than the people I was generally playing with. There's something about it when you are the age of the people that are in your cohort when you move to the city. Right?
Yeah.
Your level 1 people are your, colleagues.
Right.
Or your cohort. And by and large, those people were 23 to 25 years old, right? They just come straight from whichever Big Ten school.
Right.
And I was much older. And so I think there was probably a part of me that was thinking the whole time of like, we're going to have to clean this up. This feels disrespectful to the closing group. So I probably didn't, allow myself to be as part of it as I would have if I was 10 years younger. And not to mention, I'm like, I don't want to hurt myself, right? Like,
Yeah.
there was some amount of desire just not to have my epitaph be, he died doing what he loved.
Sliding across a wet stage. That's what he
Right.
loved?
Yeah.
That's amazing. I love that. Had not heard that story before. I did have classes with Jude. When I was at IO, so I am familiar with Jude. He was, and I think Agent of Chaos is a good description. Very mischievous.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
But also brought a lot of energy to everything he did.
totally.
Or still does, presumably. All right, I've got. I want to get through this. My little inside the actor studio Proust questionnaire type questions with you.
Yeah.
You can talk as much as you want, but otherwise, well, they're kind of rapid fire compared to what we
Got
have been
it.
doing anyway.
Yeah.
How do you get into the proper headspace to play?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I've gotten better at this, but it is a continuing exercise. The walk from my car or the train or whatever it is to the theater, I very purposely tell myself that whatever is happening in this day, whether it be good or bad, is irrelevant to what is going to happen on stage.
Yeah.
That I'm just going to clear my head. That this is a gift, like the opportunity to get on stage with friends and play for a half hour is a gift and an opportunity. And I don't do a service to it by bringing in whatever emotional state I'm having right now or on my way to the theater. Or so I really consciously between the car and the front door of the theater say I'm letting go anything that's happening, any of my concerns, any of my worry, stress. I'm not going to be engaged with the past or the future. This is my opportunity to be in this moment with these people.
Do you know when that coalesced for you? Because that would have been great for me to hear when I was in Chicago.
Yeah, probably not until the last couple of years.
Yeah. Do you find when you are going to play with a group, do you do a group warm up, or are you more reserved, off to yourself, sort of a player in the green room?
Anymore, what I prefer to do is just sit and have a conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just like to catch up.
Yeah.
Because you end up doing bits within that, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or having a laugh or whatever. So I just want to feel as connected to the people that I'm going to walk on stage with
Absolutely.
as possible. And the way that I feel the most connected is not by doing a game of a warm-up of any kind. My brain doesn't need that.
Right.
What I need is to feel emotionally connected.
Yeah, and I think that's really the key. I've done shows where we didn't really coalesce, or I've used that word twice now, where we didn't really connect before the show, and they have suffered a little bit. And in retrospect, when we were talking about it, it's like, yeah, we never did anything to get on the same page before we went on stage, and
Right.
I think, yeah, absolutely, a conversation can get you there.
Totally.
What is your favorite get for?
Like my ask,
Yeah.
I like. I would give me a word that you like the sound of.
Oh, nice.
If I just want a one-word suggestion, that's typically it. I'm in the habit of doing the ask and then asking the person who gave me that a couple questions.
Sure.
So that's my other trick, is any kind of ask, but then I always follow up with, like, why that word? Or, what's your name? How'd you end up at the show tonight? Just something. I don't know, just a couple things.
Yeah.
That sometimes contextualizes whatever that word is just enough
Yeah.
that it gives me something to grab onto in that first scene beyond just the word.
And what are you performing now? Are you Herald, or like what form, if any, are you performing now more often than not?
I've got a monthly show that I do with a buddy of mine, Timmy Tanasia, who was in Chicago before I was there, and then was in LA while I was in Chicago. And he's from Omaha, and he moved back during the pandemic, same time as I did. And we do a two-person show,
Okay.
which is kind of the dream to me.
Yeah.
It always was, right? It's, I think it's everybody's dream. Is we would watch teams like Dummy and TJ and Dave and Messing with a Friend.
Yeah.
And it aspirationally, everybody's like, I'd love to have a two-person regular.
Yes.
Right? It feels like the top of the mountain, just because of the flexibility in it. So primarily what I do now is my regular show with my buddy Timmy, and we do 50 minutes probably. We character switch
Okay.
quite a bit, and we do a little bit of an interview up top with two people from the audience. That's kind of our form.
Okay. So interview, sort of like what you're saying with your get.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
then we use a lot of it. Then part of the game is like, how much of it can we use,
Yeah.
and how much can we surprise the audience with ancillary characters or scenarios or premises or whatever that somehow add to whatever conversation we.
Because the ask, as you were talking about it, if you're not doing a Herald, if you're doing something else, you're doing something shorter, or you're doing some other form, that really does kind of serve as your opportunity to do any sort of opening, quote unquote, where you're
Yes. Yeah,
mining the suggestion.
Totally, yeah. And it also serves, I'm super into right now just this idea of like, I want to let the audience in on what's happening as much as possible. That's what short form does so successfully.
Yeah.
Right? Is it lets the audience in, makes them part of the show, lets them know what the game is.
Yeah.
One of my challenges in Chicago is that you're doing Heralds a lot, or larger ensemble stuff. And it's one thing if primarily your house is other improvisers. If it's just a general public, they don't know what's happening.
Yeah.
For like the first 10 minutes. And when I moved to Omaha, my goal was to figure out a form that still allowed me to do long form, which I love, but in such a way that the audience, who was not an informed public, right, wasn't used to watching long form shows,
Right.
Maybe had never seen an improv show, including a short form show, or even a live sketch show, let them in on the show in such a way that immediately they felt comfortable and they understood what was happening.
Yeah, it is very important. An audience who feels like they're in on it is much more responsive than those that are on guard because they feel like maybe you're making fun of them.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Do you have a least favorite suggestion?
Any food.
Is there a reason? Is it because the first scene is then in a restaurant, or?
I think it's because people are just, what they're telling me is that they're hungry.
That's so true. Now everyone's thinking about pizza. Thanks.
Now everybody's thinking about food.
Yeah.
Right? And yeah, so things are then set in a restaurant or you are making food. It ends up being the laziest. It feels like the laziest place to start.
Yeah.
I'll end up doing kind of meaningless object work. This is probably more about me than it is about them. Right? But I do think it's just like, oh, I didn't conjure anything from their brain that didn't come from their lizard brain. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's just like, give me a suggestion of anything at all, and you said burrito, and I know you're hungry, and you're thinking about food, which I think about food all the time as well. But I want the suggestion to come from the frontal cortex.
Yeah. And you don't want the entire audience thinking about their dinner reservation or the fact that they are also hungry.
Totally.
When is this going to end?
Right. Yes, exactly.
Describe your onstage persona. Who is onstage, Will?
I mean, I think he's a slightly more neurotic version of offstage Will, who is deeply interested in the psychology of the other people.
Okay.
And is always searching for like some form of understanding. So yeah, I think it's a more neurotic, more reactive version of myself, who is far more willing to get frustrated and angry,
That's good.
and excited, right? It's a tuned up version of myself.
Yeah.
I mean, one of my comedic heroes is Gene Wilder,
Yes.
and so I'm probably doing some version of a Gene Wilder.
I love that, and I remember seeing that in your improv in Chicago. I forget what show it was, but I remember seeing a show and I was like, oh geez, Will really reminded me of Gene Wilder in that show, in all the
Hell yeah.
in all the good ways, and not that I don't think there'd be a bad way,
Right.
but yeah, I love that. What inspires you on stage?
I mean, I really believe in the idea that, like, you have to treat your scene partners like artists, poets, and geniuses. I try to get my inspiration from my scene partner. I try to be deeply interested and affected by anything they say and do.
Yeah.
Even if it's the smallest thing. Right? I want to overreact. I want to be overly impressed or excited or offended, whatever it is, by the smallest gift from my scene partner.
Yeah. Is there anything that shuts you down or takes you out of it on stage?
Rejection from my scene partner, given that my inspiration is coming from them.
Yeah.
Right? So, and this is what takes people out of any relationship, is that you're making bids for connection, and anytime your bid for connection is rejected. Like, hey, you want to play? I want to play with this idea, and anything that feels like a no, to me, takes me out of the show because it's in violation of the core principle of what we're trying to do.
Yeah. What is your favorite character?
Like, to play?
Yeah, if you've got one.
Overwhelmed, and then plug in the profession or relationship.
Sure.
Like somebody just who's totally out of their depth, right?
Yeah.
And I think part of that is because it allows me to get out of my body a feeling that I often have in life anyway. And puts me in a position where my scene partner can overwhelm me more.
Yeah.
Which allows me to, which is to me like, back to my Gene Wilder. What was fun was watching Gene Wilder try to navigate a situation and his character slowly get overwhelmed by it.
Yeah.
To the point where they burst, right? So giving my scene partner the opportunity to pour more gas on the fire.
I feel like that's a great gift both for you and your scene partner, because if you're playing someone who's, near the limit or, is close to getting overwhelmed or on the way to getting overwhelmed, all of those things you talked about in terms of finding everything your scene partner does really important. Someone who's near overwhelmed is going to over-examine everything because it's just adding to that feeling of being overwhelmed.
Totally. And it's a survival mechanism, right? I mean,
yeah.
It's like there has to be an answer, and the answer has to be in front of me, right?
Yeah.
It's not outside of me somewhere. I need to be saved internally. Yeah.
What's the first indication to you that a scene is in trouble?
Ooh, that's a great question. That we haven't, but proximity to the person on stage, physical proximity.
Okay.
So if we haven't moved closer to each other at any point in the scene,
Okay.
physically, I think that scene is probably in trouble. Unless there's an obvious reason for that not to be the case.
Interesting. I like that.
So if I haven't walked over and touched them, or gotten close to them for some found a reason to be in close physical proximity to them for any reason, then I think the scene's not going well.
I like that. Do you use much tech where you are now?
No, very little.
Okay, I'm going to skip a couple of these then. Because the next one is going to be, what is the most helpful from the booth?
Oh, I think I can still answer it though.
Okay.
I mean, I like a super active tech person. Those were some of my most fun shows in Chicago because our musical director, right, Harold shows all had piano players, and the tech people did lighting cues,
Yeah.
and I love that. So I'm on board for any of it.
We touched on this, but other than laughter, what audience sound do you revel in?
Ooze. I like an ooh.
What's the best note you've ever received?
Oh boy, it's probably been some form of criticism. You know what? I remember I got done with a Herald show at I/O with the incident, and Adal Rafai was sitting in to give us notes, and his note was like, "Man, you guys just were negative throughout that entire show, and you said no to each other in a lot of different ways." And it was just a bummer, and I think you're all better than that. And I think that one experience, I felt so bad after. That I was like, God, that feels terrible. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That feels awful. I feel bad about that. I can't let that happen again.
Yeah.
If I can not be funny on stage, that's going to happen. I'm not an inherently hysterical person. But I can't. One thing I can control is like exuberantly saying yes.
Yeah. What is the worst note you've received?
You know, I think any notes that I got that were suggestions that I somehow played differently than I play
Yeah.
never felt terribly helpful to me.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Because it felt like some version of like, well, be someone else.
Yeah. Be someone that this other person that I can play with better, or the person that I
Yeah.
want you to be versus the improviser that you are.
Totally. Or be someone that I find interesting
Yeah.
on stage, right? And I always felt like, well, that's not helpful.
Yeah.
Because that's not what I can do. I could be a better version of myself. And if you want to help me do that, that sounds great. But
Yeah.
like, be more, not you, just never felt great.
For some reason now I want a t-shirt that says "Be More, Not You." If there were an Academy Awards for everything improv, what would you be nominated for?
Like the specific category name?
Yeah.
Best Group Game Initiator. And which isn't to say that my group games were brilliant, but that I would always do them.
Hey, I think that is an asset for a Herald team because boy howdy, were there sometimes it's like, oh geez, what are we gonna do?
Yeah, it was like, it's time for a group game. And I didn't mean like within the Herald we had met the scene criteria for a group game. Sometimes it's more just like, no, everybody needs to be on stage now.
Okay.
So I don't claim to be the best at like coming up with the group game, but knowing that like we need to be, you need to do the group thing now.
Yeah.
So let's do the group thing now.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would always bite that bullet and be like, we're doing the group thing. Because often the group game was Troll Will. And somehow, like, screw with his idea for the group game.
The group game becomes subvert Will's idea for the group
Yes,
game.
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Dell would say follow the fear, right? But leaning into those moments and being like, you know what, somebody has to, I'm going to bite the bullet, biting the bullet, like you said.
Right.
Doing that does, it's like reps. The more you do that, the easier those things will become.
Totally.
If you are remembered 100 years from now for something you did in improv, what would you want it to be? It doesn't have to be a specific moment in a scene or anything like that, just something,
I think the best compliment I got from someone that I played with was someone who had seen me play a bunch, but was sitting in with our team and said after, like, oh my gosh, I felt so taken care of.
Yeah.
So that, I think, would be what I would want people to say that if they were on stage with me, they felt completely supported. Like
Yeah.
the choice that they made, I would absolutely support it. I'd support it immediately, and that would give them confidence to make more and bigger choices.
That's I love that, and I think that's an endeavor we should all strive for in improv, because it really can. I mean, that can make a show, just supporting your scene partner and loving everything they do.
Totally, I agree. It's the baseline for. I always used to say to people and teams that I coach, that's the baseline for. You can not every show is going to be great. You can massively raise the floor of your shows by adhering to some basic principles of how you support, right?
Yeah.
And being generous and like those things can absolutely raise the floor such that you're not doing bad shows. You may not do a great show because those just don't come along all the time.
Yeah.
But you are going to be consistently doing good shows just based on those principles.
Yeah, and I've seen some technically bad shows that were extraordinarily enjoyable to watch, and the audience left having loved the show because of that kind of thing. People were having
Right.
fun with each other. They were supporting each other.
Totally.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you would like to say to the 6 improvisers that are listening to the podcast?
Yeah, just keep doing it. Right? And if you're not having fun, I will quote Susan Messing, if you're not having fun, you're the asshole.
Yeah.
That is it for this interview with Will Meinen. You can find Will performing and teaching around Omaha and beyond, and you should go see him if you get a chance. If there is someone you think I should interview, or if you'd like to get in touch with me or any of my guests and you can't find contact info anywhere else, drop me a line at improvbrain@gmail.com or check the show notes. Thanks for listening to Improv Autopsy. I hope you enjoyed the show, and if you did, tell each and every one of your friends. Word of mouth is the best form of advertising. If you didn't enjoy the show, keep your mouth shut. It's just your opinion and nobody cares.